Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me this morning on the eighth session of my food safety series, 1 hour webinar that I curated for the year 2026. Today, we're going to be looking at our kitchen. How is it that we are keeping our kitchen safe as we go about preparing our meals? Now, this session is particularly curated for persons who operate kitchens or restaurants or cottage-based industry individuals, persons who are operating food businesses from their home. And before I go any further, I'd like to reintroduce myself. My name is Allison Richards, the Food Safety Girl, and I operate the platform dubbed the Food Safety Girl, where I share food safety information, insight, news. I'm also a regulatory food safety specialist or professional rather for over 15 years, having worked in food safety regulation, policy and standard development. I am a certified trainer, partnering with the Bureau of Standards. I am also a food safety columnist for the Jamaica Observer, which is published every Thursday, including today. And I'm also the chapter director for the Women in Food Safety Caribbean. Now, this objective of today's session is designed to help you to reduce food safety risks within your spaces, improve customer confidence, protect your business reputation, and understand practical hygiene habits that actually work. Now, before we get into today's session, I have a quick poll I'd love for you to participate in before we move ahead. So it's two questions. I'm just going to ask that you quickly answer. The question is, which area do you think causes the most food safety problems? A, dirty hands, B, dirty equipment, C, cross-contamination, and D, poor temperature control. All right. All right, so I think everyone has selected C as cross-contamination. All right, and I have so sharing the results with you there. And then I have another poll, just another question. After today's session, or rather, I think this poll is for the end. So my apologies. We'll wait until after. So jumping into today's session, why does hygiene matter? Why are we trying to practice food safety? And the primary response is often that we want to prevent foodborne illness because foodborne illnesses often result in consumers becoming ill, right? We get negative reviews. Persons are quick to, to share their dissatisfaction. I always say in food safety, when everything is going right, you really don't hear about it. But once something goes wrong, that is when you're going to get the real feedback. So you want to avoid getting those negative reviews. Foodborne illness outbreaks also results in lost sales, right? Because once there is a negative connotation with your branch or your food product, then of course persons are going to be turned away from purchasing. And of course, that does affect your bottom line in terms of your sales. It can also result in regulatory action, your public health departments coming in, your other regulatory agencies, such as the NCRA, coming in to enforce actions against what's happening, and also loss of reputation. In other words, your name by the road, right? Nobody wants to support the business. And of course, by way of word and word of mouth, persons will share their dissatisfaction, influence other persons not to support your business. And I'm not sure how many of you are aware of the latest recall overseas regarding the parasite cyclosporiasis outbreak. and it's actually a parasite that has been found in fresh produce, in particular lettuce. So over the course of time, this particular company that has been associated with the outbreak, we're seeing where there are other fresh produce that they're linking it to. So they found parsley, and they found there now jalapenos have now been implicated. So we're seeing as the investigation goes along that the number of produce that this outbreak is impacting is increasing, and of course the reputation of the company, having not been the first time they've been implicated in a recall of that nature, that is doing some damage or reputational damage to them, right? Now, people don't often see the things that you do behind closed doors. They don't see the inspections that you experience or you have to go through or you have to prepare for. However, they're thinking about what's happening behind. When you go to a restaurant, nobody's thinking about what happened at the last inspection. They're really thinking about the state of your kitchen, right? Now, what is food hygiene? Food hygiene is everything that you do to prevent your food from becoming safe, right? So everything. So it includes your personal hygiene. How is it that you keep your nails? Are your nails clean? Are you trimming them down, right? Are you making sure that you have a shower, as simple as it sounds? How are you carrying yourself? Is your hair well groomed, especially for a male? Right? It's also talking about clean PPEs. Are your hairnets clean? Are you wearing your hairnets out onto the street before returning back to preparation? Are you washing your hands after leaving your preparation area? It also includes cleaning. How well are you cleaning up after we are, making preparation? How are we cleaning ahead of preparing food? It's also focusing on sanitizing, because after cleaning, there's no guarantee that you have effectively removed all your microorganisms. So what are we doing after we've done cleaning? And it's important for us to sanitize. It's also looking at pest control, right? How is it that we are making sure that we prevent pests from entering into our spaces? How are we preventing them from taking over and they're becoming a huge infestation problem? And it's also looking at safe storage. How are you storing your foods? Are you storing them away from the wall, away from your ceiling? Are you storing them off the floor on pallets? If we're operating outside of our kitchens, how are we storing them? Are we cleaning our cupboards often? Are making sure that if we have any which we're storing our commodities like our rice or cornmeal or flour, are we storing them in airtight containers to prevent the entry of pests? And there's also the concern of waste disposal. How are we disposing of our waste? Are we keeping our bins closed? Are we taking our waste out at the end of the day versus letting it stay overnight? And then there's also cross-contamination prevention, which is what most of us answered in the earlier poll, that cross-contamination is really one of our major concerns when it comes on to food safety. Now, let's look a bit on the difference between cleaning and sanitizing. Cleaning is removing dirt and food residue. So when we look at something, we look at our hands, they're heavily soiled. How do we clean our hands? It means that we're using soap and water. We're rubbing our hands together, a little scrubbing action, even a dirty table. We're adding soap and water, we're scrubbing, right? And we're removing any visible dirt from that surface. That is referred to as cleaning, right? And then sanitizing is what we do after cleaning. So we're reducing any pathogen or bacteria that might be remaining on the surface that we've just cleaned to safe levels. So sanitizing targets the pathogens that we can't see, the microorganisms, right? So a perfect example I like to use is the fact that during COVID, we all adopted using sanitizers, and now I realize that persons are now opting to use hand sanitizers versus washing their hands. So the message behind that is that sanitizing should never replace cleaning. You must use soap and water to get rid of dirt, because what happens is that if we don't remove the dirt, it means that the bacterial load is so high that the alcohol or whatever sanitizing agent we're using is just simply not enough to get rid of that extra germ. So washing your hands washing your surfaces using soap and water is important in being effective when it comes on to cleaning. And after cleaning, then we're getting into sanitizing. So the procedure is that you wash with your soap and water, rinse with clean water, and then you go in with your sanitizer. And often your sanitizing agents are left to dry on the surface because that is really where the power lies. So you don't wipe it off, you just spread it on your surface, just like with your hands. You spray a sanitizer, you rub your hands, and you'll feel based on the alcoholic nature of it, you'll feel it cool and then it dries on your hand. It is that residue that remains that is what usually makes it effective. Here we have an image of what should really happen. So we have our dirty plate, we have our food residue and germs that are present. We're washing with detergent to remove the dirt, the grease, and the food residue. Food plate looks clean, right? Clean and shiny. However, there may still contain bacteria, right? Because bacteria we cannot see. That's why they're called microorganisms because we literally need a microscope to see them. And because the bacteria or any other microorganism may be present, we're going to go in with a sanitizer, which reduces the bacteria to safe levels. And of course, the plate would now be safe for food preparation and serving. Now let's talk a bit about personal hygiene, right? What does that include? It includes washing our hands properly. And when I say wash our hands properly, I'm not just talking about sprinkling a little water or dipping our hand in water to wash our hands. I'm talking about using soap, wetting your hand with water, adding soap, scrubbing, getting in your palm between your fingers, your fingernails, and then rinsing with fresh water and then sanitizing after. Another aspect of personal hygiene is staying home whenever we're ill. Once you're ill, you need to stay home. Because what that does is that you're exposing all your other colleagues to the illness that you're suffering from. And especially some of these illnesses can cause contamination of food. And then that is how other persons can become ill as well. We also want to cover our cuts. Once we have a cut, we want to make sure that we have it covered. And when covered, and I don't mean just slipping on a glove, right? You have to make sure that you clean the cut, use adequate bandages or band-aids. And of course, if it's a cut that is small enough that you can continue working, it needs to be waterproof. And in addition to a bandage, then you would add a glove. So you're not going to just add a glove to your bare skin. It's important that we add a glove to after you've added your bandage. And what that does is secure your bandage to ensure that it doesn't fall off. Because we definitely don't want any bodily fluids or worse, even a band-aid in somebody's meal, right? We also want to make sure that we're wearing clean clothing. That is such an important fact. So you wear, and when I refer to clothing, I'm also talking about your aprons. So if you are wearing aprons, you definitely want to make sure that you are keeping your aprons clean. They're on a laundry schedule. You're not wearing the same apron for an entire week before washing. Or if you have special clothing that you change off into, that is on a rigid cleaning schedule as well, our laundry schedule. You want to also avoid touching your face. Your face has so much, dead skin. There's also oil, that you secrete. You definitely don't want to contaminate your food in that way. You're not also contaminating the food. You also have to protect yourself. Because if you have an open sore and you probably touched something that was contaminated raw meat, then there is a chance that your cut does get infected and it can become worse. As I mentioned before, keeping your nails clean. That's also an added advantage. Keeping your nails clean because you don't want germs that's lodged under your nails to get onto your food, especially your ready-to-eat foods that your consumers are not necessarily reheating or adding any other kill step to before they consume it. Then there's the issue of wearing your hair restraints. So we want to make sure that all our hairs are covered. Now, I don't know about you, but if I go somewhere and I buy something to eat and I'm seeing hair on my food, my first guess is never, or some persons will never guess that it's hair from your head, right? They're always gonna assume the worst. So especially if it's somebody that has natural hair and it's kinky. So you definitely don't want to have your hair exposed. One of the common things I used to say as an inspector is persons with their edges out because they have to maintain the image. But you'd always want to make sure that all your hair is covered. For the gentlemen with beard, you want to make sure that you're covering your beards as well, right? Because it's still hair. We definitely don't want hair to get into the food. Now, when should we wash our hands? We want to make sure we're washing our hands before we start working, before putting on gloves. A lot of people think that because you're wearing gloves, they don't need to wash their hands. But remember, if your hands are dirty and you touch on the outside of the gloves to put it on, then it means that your gloves is dirty, right? And in any event, your glove probably is pierced or there's a tear in your glove, then it means that you're exposing the food or whatever you're handling to germs, right? So you always want to make sure that you wash your hands before putting on your gloves and before preparing ready to eat foods. Now, ready to eat foods are foods that are literally ready to eat. Once you pull it out of the package, it means that you don't have to warm it, you don't have to heat treat it. It means that it's ready. And that would include like our snacks. It can include a sandwich that you buy at a convenience store at the supermarket. All of those foods are considered ready to eat. So you can imagine if someone whose hand is dirty is preparing a sandwich for you or a salad that you just literally pick up and you're ready to eat, that is a huge concern. You should also be washing your hands after using the restroom, handling raw meat, touching garbage, handling money, coughing, sneezing, using your phone. And the phone is such a big deal because our phones have become our extended appendage. It's like an extended arm to us because we take our phones everywhere, even in the bathroom, right? And how often do we actually sanitize our phones? Because that same phone that we have in the bathroom is that same phone we carry back into the kitchen to look at a recipe or we're talking to a loved one. The same phone we sleep beside in the night, the same phone you use with the same hand to open a public door. You're on public transportation, right? And it's back into food production. So we want to make sure that we're washing our hands. Anytime we move away from food prep, we should be washing our hands. Now, as a former inspector, there's a lot of things that we would find when doing, or I would find or see in particular, whenever we're doing our inspections. And one of those, or some of those include no soap at the hand washing sink, right? So the facility, your home is equipped with a hand wash station. However, things are missing from the hand wash sink. So you'll see that you may have um a empty soap bottle there. Probably it was emptied and it wasn't replenished on time, or it's diluted soap. That is so often a thing that I hate to see because oftentimes, even though our chemical producers do make soap that do, they recommend dilution and they would give you your dilution um rates, not every soap should be diluted because what is happening there is that you're weakening the disinfection property of the soap. So it means that you're using the soap and the soap is not effective because the amount that is required to effectively kill is not there. So we always want to be careful when we're diluting our hand wash soaps and soaps in general. Because if the soap was not made with the intention to be diluted before use, or liquid soap rather, then it means that it is ineffective, right? Now, another common inspection finding, and before I move on to the second one, another concern is that your paper towels are supposed to be covered, right? We always sometimes just say paper towels just being left on a countertop, right? Or on a spool and it's just exposed. So you want to make sure that your paper towels are covered, right? Another inspection finding is that employees washing hands with water only. I mentioned that before. You must use soap to wash your hands effectively, right? Another thing is dirty wiping cloths. That one cloth that is used to do every single thing. It used to wipe down the counter. It used to wipe off a basin. It used to wipe off something that spilled on the wall. We want to make sure that we're keeping our wiping cloths clean. A solution to that is just having a basin with chlorine, or chlorinated water, And of course, you have to pay attention to your chlorine levels in these water because if you don't put enough chlorine, it means that it's ineffective. But a good option is to have your cloth after wiping, you're able to rest it in that container to keep
Yes, my
it clean.
regular Wednesday accent is in. Yeah,
Shantoy,
I'm sorry.
we're hearing you, no problem. It happens. All right. And then we have food residue on slicers. So if you're operating with using a slicer or those equipments with those narrow crevices, ineffective cleaning, you see meat or food particles or bread crumbs lodged into those small spaces. And what that does is that if once food is lodged there, it means that pests are going to be coming, bacteria could be growing, and then that is where you have cross-contamination occurring. Another finding is poor date marking. Now, something I want to reemphasize is that when you have, and something I would always, so I will see, not always, but sometimes I would see it. So, for example, a food cottage-based industry person is making baked products, right? And they would make, for example, 50 slices of cake that they're doing. What would happen sometimes is that the date that they end up putting on this cake is not the date they actually bake the cake. Because, for example, you bake it, or let me not use cake. A cake is a bit more perishable. Well, for example, we're doing coconut drops, right? You know, those are hardy pastries and they tend to have a longer shelf life because of the high sugar content. Now, they may do coconut drops and they might have 100 and they do it on Monday. Now, they didn't have any orders going out on Monday or Tuesday, but when someone called today and say, hey, I'm gonna need, or Wednesday and call and say I need some for Friday. What this person sometimes do, or what they will do, is that they pick 50 out of that 100 that they've done and they slap the date of packaging on the product when it was done probably a week before, a few days before. So what that does is that it's not correctly reflecting the shelf life of the product. So by the time they package that product with an incorrect date, when it gets to the vendor who they're selling it to, that vendor has it for another week or two before it's sold, you realize the implication of buying a stale product, right? And the date on it is saying something else. So that is something that we want to make sure that we're paying attention to. And the last inspection finding I'm going to cover is poor waste management. That is such an issue. I mean, nationally, it is an issue where persons are having challenges with the relevant authorities picking up. However, there is the need for accountability on our part to ensure that we are at least disposing of our garbage securely, right? Once you have waste improperly disposed of, that is where the problem occurs, where you have your rodents coming in, your cockroaches, your ants, all of those pests coming, and then that is another headache that you have to take on. Now let's talk about cleaning. Our cleaning schedule. So yes, we know how to clean. We all clean our homes. However, it is very important for you to develop a cleaning schedule. And your cleaning schedule can be determined based on what you're cleaning, right? So you can have a daily cleaning schedule where you know on a daily basis you're cleaning your dishes, your plates, your containers that you're using for production, your countertops, your tables, those are cleaned daily. Your floor you're wiping daily, you're sweeping daily, right? However, on a weekly basis, you might do a deeper clean. So you're scrubbing your appliances, you're degreasing, you're sanitizing fully. And then monthly, those can include larger equipments. For example, maybe your oven, right? Those are things that you can look at cleaning monthly. Now, you must be able to assign responsibility for the different things that are to be cleaned. Because what you want is that everybody has if you're working with a team, everybody has a clear idea of what the expectation is, what they are supposed to be doing, right? So you assign responsibility and then you're documenting completion to make sure that this was done, and that is what you have to show your inspector. That yes, even though we all know we clean, the inspector come and say that it's clean, there has to be some form of documentation. Now, if there's no schedule, it means that you may forget to do things. Now let's look at some high-touch surfaces. Those are our refrigerator handles, because we touch those to open and close, right? We have our doorknobs. Everybody touch. People go to the bathroom and they don't wash their hands, and then you end up and you come and touch the same doorknob that they're touching, right? Our faucet handles, our POS terminals, our touch screens, or phones, or light switches. Those are even dirtier than the preparation tables. So that's why it's pretty important for you to make sure that you are paying attention to these high touch surfaces and that they are included in your sanitation schedule. Now let's look a bit at cross-contamination. That is the spread of bacteria from one food item or surface to another, right? And a common example is the spread of bacteria from raw chicken. So you're using a cutting tool, your knife, or you're using a cutting board. So the same cutting board that you use to cut the raw chicken on is the same cutting board you come back to use and cut up your lettuce on, right? So that is how cross-contamination occurs. And in that image depicted there, we have our raw chicken, our red bacteria or pathogens on our chicken. We use the knife to cut it. You see that the bacteria is transferred to the knife. And then you use the same knife to cut the salad, and you're seeing the bacteria transfer to the salad. And then it ends up with the customer. And as I mentioned earlier, the current outbreak, the cyclosporiasis outbreak that we have ongoing, something similar like that happened, right? We're not from chicken, but from the farm, right? Or soil may have been contaminated with this parasite, and lettuce grows in the soil, and then we come and we eat it. Now, cross-contamination happens by using the same knife, the same cutting board as I mentioned, the same dirty cloth that I mentioned earlier as well, improper storage. So we're storing our raw meat above our ready-to-eat foods in our refrigerator, wearing dirty gloves, and improper hand washing. Now, what are some storage best practices, right? How are we storing our ready-to-eat foods? We want to make sure that we're storing them in a dry area, right? Not too much light, cool, that it's cool. And this is, I'm referring to ambient temperature products, right? If it's a salad or a sandwich, we want to make sure that it's kept refrigerated, right? We also want to talk about cooked foods. How are we storing our cooked foods? Once food is prepared, it should be refrigerated within 2 hours of consumption. So if food is cooked and if it's not being kept on a warmer, it needs to be refrigerated within 2 hours of said cooking, right? So we just want to make sure that we release the steam, allow the steam to escape, package it into smaller storage containers, and have it refrigerated. For seafood, those are perishable items. Those need to be kept cold. And when I say cold, I'm meaning below 4.4 degrees Celsius. The same thing for whole cuts and ground meat and poultry. All of these products should be refrigerated or frozen. And we want to make sure that we're keeping them out of the danger zone, which is between 4.4 degrees Celsius and 63 degrees Celsius. All right. Now let's talk about cleaning chemicals. You should never store your chemicals beside food. You should not use food containers for chemicals. So sometimes we have a habit of we just take off the label of the soda bottle and just pour in little bleach inside there. That is definitely not recommended, right? Because the last thing you want to do is for someone to mistake bleach with vinegar, right? So you want to make sure that you're not doing that. You never want to mix chemicals. Sometimes chemicals can create fumes that can be toxic or poisonous. For example, mixing bleach with vinegar that can be a bit caustic to your respiratory lining, right? And what you want to do, good practice, is to label your containers, follow the manufacturing instructions. I remember we talked about the soap. If the soap is not meant to be diluted, we definitely don't want to be diluting. Because if we don't know the dilution factor, it means that we might be over diluting and then it becomes ineffective. And you also want to store separately away from food handling. Now let's touch a bit on pest prevention. We want to make sure that we're cleaning our spills immediately, keeping the doors closed, removing waste, sealing gaps. So when you turn your light off from inside, in the day, you shouldn't be seeing a lot of sunlight coming in, right? Because that means from you can see the sunlight peeping in, it means that your rats, your roaches, and your ants are able to come in. And you also want to make sure that you're storing your food correctly. An important point is that pests are only out there looking for food, right? So once there's food, once you're not practicing proper sanitation, you're not cleaning up after yourself, it means that the pests, you cannot get rid of the pests, right? They're always going to come. Now, let's talk a bit about food safety culture, right? Before we wrap up. A food safety culture is born by everyone who is involved in food, right? And positive food safety culture is that everybody understands the importance of food safety and they play their part in ensuring that food safety is practiced, right? Now, persons loved, and I mean, one of the experiences I had as an inspector is that persons would only clean up. Like I remember showing up to facilities to do inspections and I'd have to wait even because some of our inspections would be unannounced. So you just show up, right? You wouldn't tell anybody you're coming. And you'd have to wait half an hour sometimes because it's only when the inspector comes people remember that they need to clean and to do what is right, right? So that always and oftentimes, after sitting and waiting so long, you walk into the facility and the place is stink with bleach because that's literally what they were doing while you had to wait, cleaning up, right? So that is a poor food safety culture. Positive food safety culture is what happens when you're not expecting an inspector. What happens when nobody's looking? So are you saying, I can't bother no, because my spam now look to this, but me just go and screech and do what I'm doing? Or are you doing what is required of you? Are you holding your coworkers accountable for following what the rules are, right? So a clean kitchen isn't created by inspection, it is created by habits. What it is that you do on a daily basis to ensure that food reaches consumers in the way that it should. And everyone has a responsibility. Everyone who works in that establishment has a responsibility. The government has a responsibility, and consumers do have a responsibility as well, right? So all of it is a team effort, and the team is only as strong as the weakest member, right? Now I have a quick knowledge check before we end for today, and it's a true or false question. So you can either type in the chat or you can open your mics and share your answers. Sanitizing works better on dirty surfaces. True or false? Anyone want to take that one? False. That's correct, Shona. Thank you for answering. Debbie answers false. Great. Next one. Gloves replace hand washing. True or false? Okay, I'm seeing false. Okay. Cleaning removes visible dirt. True. Okay. Right. Sanitizing reduces microorganisms. Right. True. And dirty cloths can spread bacteria. All right, I'm seeing true. All right, so let's play kitchen detectives now. So looking at that photo that we see right there on screen, what food safety risks do you see? Why is it a problem and how would you fix it? Does anyone want to give that a go? Don't be shy, you can open your mic and share your answers. Anyone? Is everyone seeing the photo?
Okay, it's Ida Williams. Good morning, everybody.
Hi, hello.
I do not cook. I avoid the kitchen at all costs. Anyways, from here, looking at the container with the washcloth, that water looked dirty. The cutting board, the person doing whatever with the meat, she has no gloves on. And the sink full of dirty utensils. Looking at what's that? The refrigerator. It appears
Mhm.
open. The meat looks uncovered. The just opening, if the refrigerator door is open, then that's the bad thing.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, so
just kind of
there's a lot going on in this
a
in this
busy, a
picture.
busy cook.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's also handling money, looks like.
Oh yeah,
Yes.
I didn't see
Yes.
that.
And she's also
Yes.
storing the raw meat above the vegetables and other
Right.
prepackaged food. She's wrong.
Right. All right. Thank you. I'm seeing Debian says raw chicken being stored above the lettuce. I would move the uncooked meat to the lowest shelf in the fridge. That's a very good recommendation. All right. Thank you very much for your participation in that. So there are three things I'd encourage you to do. If you do operate a food business, if you want to have plans to, I would want you to review hand washing practices. Persons always, every time I do a training and I say to them, so you have to wash your hands, it's always like I'm mocking them, right? It's always important to review hand washing practices. How often persons are supposed to, especially depending on the type of product. If it's a very sensitive product, what do you have in place for persons to hand wash, right? Inspect your cleaning schedules. Are you covered? Is everything covered? Are all equipment, utensils covered on your cleaning schedule? Right? And identify one cross-contamination risk that you can fix immediately in your spaces. Right? So that is my recommendation to you. And we are gonna jump into our second poll of today for today, which is our final poll. I'm just gonna ask you to hold on. So the poll is up. And the question is, after today's session, how confident do you feel about improving hygiene in your workplace or your space? Very confident, somewhat confident, need more training. All right. Everyone is saying very confident. All right. Thank you for participating in that poll. Before we go today, or do we have any questions? Anything you're not clear on? Anything you'd like to find out more about? All right. I'd also like to invite you to participate in the survey that I have going on for research. It is a pretty short survey, kind of just quizzing yourself on, your understanding of food safety. And it is a research I'm doing to kind of get some information on food safety education in Jamaica. So you can scan the QR code that is on screen and you should be able to or screenshot it, and then at a later time you will be able to do the survey. I'd also like to invite you to register for the my other the upcoming webinar. I'm seeing something in the chat. Okay, Shantar. So I'd also like to invite you to register. I will send you an email after today's webinar with a link to the recording of today's session in case you joined late, and also the opportunity to register for our next webinar. and that's going to be focused on food recalls. So if you want to learn more about food recalls, if you're a small business operator, if you are in a quality role at work that involves, being a part of the recall team, this will be a good webinar for you and your colleagues. I'd also like to invite you to check out my article in today's Observer. I have explored the cyclosporiasis outbreak, and you can also look out for my articles every Thursday in the food section of the Observer, the Jamaica Observer. And if you're not already following me on social media, I'm also inviting you to do so at the Food Safety Girl. I am on Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, Facebook, and I pretty much just share food safety content, news updates, and anything that's happening. All right, so you can also scan that QR code and it will take you to the different platforms. Thank you all for joining me today. It was a pleasure having you. I hope you found the session informative and that you at least walk away having learned at least one thing. Thank you and have a great day and week.